Hello. You know that famous song by Bob Dylan? How many repressions must a man enforce before he calls himself a man? And how many cathexis does a happily heterosexual married man have to enforce before he calls himself that? You know that song, right? It's a very famous song written by Bob Dylan. What? Those were not the only words. Those were not his words. He didn't write those words. I must have imagined that he wrote those words. Well, if he hadn't, maybe he should consider rewriting that song. Because I think that is what makes a man. It's not about the roads that he travels. It's about the repressions that he enforces upon himself. And I have been thinking about it rather a lot of late, not only in the context of the Judith Butler talks that I've just recorded, but also because I was also reading an essay by Lennard J. Davis. Now, many of you may be aware of Lennard J. Davis because he is regarded as being one of the pioneers of what we today regard as disability studies. And at my university, I teach a very small extract of Lennard J. Davis's book, which is called, I'll give you the exact name, Enforcing Normalcy, Disability, Deafness, and the Body. And I was reading that essay again this morning, and when I was reading that essay, I found that what Lennard J. Davis is doing is very much a continuation of the work that Judith Butler has done in Gender Trouble. And so therefore, what I shall do is ask you to think of this as perhaps an extension of Butler's project. Not Butler's project per se, but a certain post-structuralist way of looking at identity. And the way in which we are going to talk about identity today is that we are going to look at identity as a series of repressions. This is nothing new. We've already done this. But we will look at particularly the concept of Spaltung. So Spaltung is a concept that many of you will be very, very familiar with, or you would find it very easy to understand when I explain exactly what Spaltung is. Because Spaltung is very similar to what we have done in the Judith Butler lectures, which is to discuss Julia Kristeva's notion of abjection. And I really think that Spaltung and abjection and what Lennard J. Davis does in his book, they're all very, very similar. Because they are all talking about the various levels of repression, various levels of expulsion, various levels of denial that go into making us what we are. So therefore, it is not so much what we are, but it is what we are not, right? And I was thinking about Spaltung in the context of something that happened very recently, in which, I'm not going to go into too many details about it, but let's take, for example, I'm changing the identity of the people concerned a little bit. Let's take the example of, say, for example, Mr. A. Now, Mr. A is married to B. So, Mrs. A. And they're a happily married couple. Mr. A is happily married to Mrs. A. And Mr. A is sitting by the window, and outside a woman passes by. Now this woman is a cis woman, right? So therefore there is perfect alignment, as it were, between her sex assigned at birth, her gender, and so therefore that makes her a cis woman. And so here was this cis woman who was walking by, and she was talking to her friend, And she was talking in the way in which people normally associate cis women talk with, the way in which it becomes very easy for a certain kind of patriarchal person to mimic, misogynist person to mimic, sing-song voice, high-pitched voice, and all of that. Yeah. But what was really interesting is that here was this woman who was walking by, and she was not harming anyone. She was not imperiling anybody's life. She was simply walking down the street talking to her friend. Now, Mr. A, who was sitting by the window, Mr. A decided that this woman had to be made fun of. So therefore, Mr. A mimicked the way in which the woman was talking, and before moving on to do other things. Now, that actually set me thinking, and I thought, why was it necessary for Mr. A to mimic this particular woman? She wasn't in any way making fun of Mr. A. She was completely unaware of Mr. A's existence. She was simply talking to her friend. Why did she have to be made fun of? And then I suddenly realized that I think Mr. A felt the need to make fun of Miss Unknown, Miss X, because he felt that this was a way in which he could consolidate his monogamous status. So therefore, monogamy is, like all the other aspects of our identity, constituted through the performance of a lack of interest in other people in whom you would otherwise be interested. Just because Mr. A thinks of himself as heterosexual, therefore he thinks that it is perhaps necessary for him to make fun of other women. Because if he makes fun of other women, then it becomes easier for him to claim that he's not interested in other women. Why? Oh, because he loves his wife so much. It is the love of his wife that leads him to make fun of other women. Now, this is an example of Spaltung. What is Spaltung? Spaltung, of course, is a German term. This is something that was used by Freud quite frequently. Freud used it most importantly in 1927 when he was writing the essay on fetishism. And he also used it sometime later in 1940. And I'll give you the name of that essay. It's called Splitting of the Ego in the Process of Defense. So therefore, in Splitting, Spaltung. So therefore, in this particular essay, and in many other essays in bits and pieces, Freud basically talks about the way in which we are formed as a result of these splits that we have to make within ourselves. Now, this splitting therefore means that in our heads we create a good and a bad. Binarization. We create a good and a bad. And Lennard J. Davis, who is writing his book in 1995, which is 5 years after Judith Butler's Gender Trouble, Lennard J. Davis, he interprets Spaltung in his essay to say how the able body and the disabled body, that binary is created. I am abled because you are disabled. Yes. And he cites the example of the child who fairly early on in life, when they are a child, they start to do this sort of splitting between the good parent and the bad parent. So therefore, so I have a good parent, I have a bad parent. My mother loves me, my father doesn't love me. Or conversely, my father loves me, my mother doesn't love me. So this kind of a splitting helps the child organize information. Now, once we get into that habit of organizing information through creating a good and a bad, we continue to do that for the rest of our life, and we also do that when it comes to romantic relationships, especially if we are trying to convince ourselves that we are monogamous. Because monogamy basically means that you are going to be romantically attracted and sexually attracted, and your romantic and sexual focus is going to be on one single person all the time as long as you live. which I personally find very difficult to imagine. So therefore, this kind of repression that monogamy also entails, this kind of repression you can certainly call Spaltung, you can certainly call splitting. And it is very, very similar to Julia Kristeva's idea of abjection, because when you are doing the Spaltung, when you're doing the splitting, the bad part, you are saying that I'm not interested in, I'm only interested in the good. How many times have you heard people say, no, but I want to concentrate on the positive? Which is all very well that you're concentrating on the positive. Good luck to you. But when you're saying that I want to concentrate on the positive, what you're basically saying very often is, I'm a good person. I'm a good person, so therefore I want to concentrate on something positive because I am positive myself. No, you're not. No, you're not. There are several negativities in you, but you have created a Spaltung within yourself. You have created an abjection within yourself, which tells you bad bits are not mine. Only the good bits are mine. I'm a good person. I'm a very sensitive person. I'm a very loyal person. And when we think about Spaltung and when we think about abjection, these things also come to play when you are talking about the construction of monogamy, because you are basically saying that, yes, I'm a heterosexual man and I'm attracted to women, but there are good women, bad women. Okay, and who is a good woman, who is a bad woman? Well, good woman is the woman to whom I'm married, bad women are all the others. My wife is wonderful. All the other women have faults. My wife is flawless. Yeah? So therefore, there is a way in which Spaltung consolidates not only our gender identity, not only our ableist identity, which is what Lennard J. Davis is saying. Not only does Spaltung consolidate, well, our religious identity, my religion good, your religion bad. Not only does Spaltung also consolidate our national identity, my country good, your country bad. Not only does it consolidate our regional identity, West Bengal good, Maharashtra bad, but it also consolidates our sexual lives. It also consolidates our romantic, our sort of, matrimonial lives. So therefore, my husband or my wife is the hottest person I know. Everybody else is less hot. And this but what is important is that, like all Spaltung, this Spaltung also requires constant performance. Constant performance. So therefore, regular performance, right? So therefore, marriage anniversary photos on Facebook. Look, I still love my husband, or conversely, I still love my wife. Look, we are still enamored of each other. Why the whole necessity of celebrating your anniversary on Instagram and Facebook is a performance. It's a performance of your sexual life. It is giving public proof of the fact that you have basically effectively managed to create Spaltung within yourself, which is to say, I'm only attracted to my wife or my husband. I don't even look at other people. Yes, because I'm so loyal. And also, I think what this does is that once you have done that performance, it allows you a certain kind of, license to indulge in activities that are perhaps not entirely loyal. We are talking about a state of lockdown. I'm sure you're going to agree with me that under the cover of the lockdown, lots of very interesting virtual relationships are forming on Facebook inbox, on Instagram inbox, and through WhatsApp, which perhaps don't entirely qualify as monogamous. You have got girlfriends who are reaching out to other men and who are having, sex chat with them. You have got husbands who are reaching out to other women. You certainly have wives who are reaching out to other men. So therefore, there is a way in which this performance of monogamy is somehow serving as a mask to hide, other sexual urges, which are not disappearing, Because if you go into the inboxes of people, and if you go into the WhatsApp message box of people, you will find that sexual urges and sexual desires are absolutely multi-directional. They are being directed to all sorts of people. But we are not going to talk about it, because in public we are going to say, oh, what is this? This is terrible. I can't imagine looking at other people. I can't imagine desiring other people. So you performatively create this kind of Spaltung, you performatively create this abjection, and through it, you are then creating your identity not only of gender, of sexuality, of religion, of race, of ableism, but also of monogamy. Thank you so much.